In the aftermath of World War II, memory began to harden into categories. People were heroes or villains, they were crimes or they were victories. But certain figures remain awkward to place. They do not fit easily into the moral furniture of the history. Hans Joachim Scharff was one of these men. He did not design weapons, nor command armies, nor stand in the dock at Nuremberg. He worked instead in offices and quiet rooms in the half-lit spaces where tea was poured and cigarettes were offered, and where men who had fallen from the sky found themselves, for a time, strangely at ease. And it was here that Scharf applied his unique skill, extracting information. Welcome to History Unpacked. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. We post every week, and we welcome any feedback. Scharf was born in Berlin in 1907, into a world of museums, books, and orderly conversation. His father was an art historian and a museum director, and the son inherited something of that same quiet, reflective temperament. He studied economics and art history, learned languages, and travelled. There was nothing in those early years to suggest a future shaped by war, still less by interrogation. When the National Socialists came to power, Scharf did what millions of others did. He adjusted himself to the new reality. He was not a firebrand, not an ideologue, not a man drawn to uniforms or slogans. When war came, he entered the Luftwaffe in a largely administrative capacity, serving as a translator and a clerk. It was here, almost by accident, that his particular talent began to reveal itself. By the early years of the conflict, Germany was accumulating prisoners in growing numbers. British and Canadian airmen at first, and later Americans as well. Men shot down over occupied Europe, suddenly removed from the noise and violence of the air war and placed into a quieter, more ambiguous captivity. The task of extracting information from them fell to the Luftwaffe's intelligence services, who were interested not in confessions or propaganda, but in practical details: flight routes, navigation methods, new equipment, changes in tactics. The traditional methods were blunt. Some interrogators relied on threats, others on deception. A few drifted into cruelty. Results were uneven. Fear made some men silent, pressure made others lie. Scharf noticed something else entirely. He noticed that after the first days of capture had passed, many prisoners were not defiant so much as tired, isolated, starved of ordinary human contact. They had been removed from their crews, their routines, their familiar world, and placed into a kind of suspended existence where days had little shape and time moved strangely. And so, instead of confronting them, Scharf began to talk to them. He did not bring them into bare rooms, he did not sit them under lights or behind desks. Sometimes he invited them to walk. Sometimes he sat with them in comfortable surroundings. He spoke about art, about travel, about their homes. He spoke, when it suited him, about the absurdity of war, about how strange it was that men who might have been friends in another life now found themselves on opposite sides of a catastrophe neither had truly chosen. He rarely asked direct questions. Instead, he made statements. He would remark, in passing, that their squadron must have been operating out of a certain airfield, that the new bomber must have had a longer range than its predecessor, that navigation must have become easier since the introduction of new equipment. If the prisoner nodded or corrected him, or added some small detail, Scharf remembered it. If the prisoner said nothing, the conversation simply moved on. There was no visible pressure, no clear moment of danger. Often, the man being questioned did not realize that anything of consequence had been said at all. Scharf cultivated, with quiet care, the impression that the Germans already knew nearly everything, that resistance was largely symbolic, that the war's great mechanisms were moving far beyond the influence of any one crew or aircraft. In reality, he often possessed only fragments, but fragments presented confidently have a way of suggesting a much larger picture. Faced with this, many prisoners relaxed. If the enemy already knew, what harm could there be in confirming it? The harm, of course, lay in accumulation. A correction here, a clarification there, a casual aside. Over time, a surprisingly complete picture began to form. What made this approach so effective was not cleverness alone, but its tone. There was no struggle, no visible contest of wills. The mind, unthreatened, did not raise its usual defenses. Conversation flowed, silences were comfortable. The prisoner, feeling almost like a guest, forgot just briefly that he was also a source. After the war, this would become one of the most unsettling discoveries. When Allied intelligence officers debriefed former prisoners, many insisted quite sincerely that they had not told Scharff anything of value. And yet, the records showed otherwise. Units had been mapped, procedures infirmed, technical changes noted, all without force, all without the prisoners ever feeling defeated. I'll be honest, there is a temptation in telling this story to treat Scharf as a kind of humane alternative in an inhumane system. He did not beat his prisoners, he did not threaten them, he did not starve or terrify them into submission, but really this is only part of the picture. He was still working for a regime at war. The information he gathered still helped German defenses adapt and improve. Politeness did not make the results any less lethal. It merely made the process quieter. Scharf himself seems to have been throughout a man curiously detached from the ideological storms around him. He was not an SS officer. He did not speak in the language of racial struggle or destiny. He appears instead as one of the vast class of educated functionaries who made the Third Reich work by doing their jobs carefully and without asking too many questions about the larger design. When Germany collapsed, Scharf did not flee into obscurity or attempt to disappear into the wreckage of the Reich. He was taken into custody and he was questioned, though not in the manner that so many others were. The men who interviewed him were not looking for crimes. They were trying to understand a process. As Allied intelligence sifted through the captured Luftwaffe files, a strange pattern began to emerge. Time and again, detailed operational knowledge appeared in reports attributed to prisoners who, when later debriefed by their own side, insisted that they had told the Germans nothing of consequence. The contradiction was too consistent to ignore. Only when these accounts were traced back to Scharf's work did the mechanism become visible. As for himself, he spoke freely. There was no bravado in it and no attempt to dramatize his role. He described his methods in plain, almost technical language. Patience, conversation, never forcing the pace, never allowing the other man to feel that anything of importance was at stake. He did not speak of morality, only of results. In the years that followed, these ideas did not remain curiosities. They were studied, they were adapted, they were quietly absorbed into Western interrogation doctrine. Training programs began to place less emphasis on confrontation and more on atmosphere, less on breaking resistance and more on dissolving it. Interrogation, in this new conception, became something closer to a guided conversation than a struggle. This did not mean that harsher methods vanished from the world, of course they did not, but alongside them grew another tradition, one that treated information not as something to be torn from a man, but as something he might be led, almost without noticing, to offer. There was something faintly unsettling in this inheritance. Techniques developed in service of a totalitarian war effort had outlived the regimes that created them and found new homes in the institutions of its former enemies. They were no longer German, they were no longer Scharfs, they had simply become professional. Scharf himself returned to civilian life and lived quietly, dying in 1992. He did not seek attention, and history, for the most part, did not insist on giving it to him. Yet his influence lingered in places he would never see, in classrooms, in manuals, in the unspoken assumptions of an entire profession. And so his story resists simple classification. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he really didn't need to. He demonstrated something more uncomfortable, that certainty can be eroded without force, that a man can be guided without ever feeling pushed, that the most effective pressure may be the kind that does not announce itself as pressure at all. In a century marked by blunt instruments, by ideologies that ruled over through noise and terror, Hans Scharff represents something quieter, and perhaps more disturbing still, the careful, civilized exploitation of the human mind. After all, he did not break his prisoners, he simply let them speak.